Bombay, now officially known as Mumbai, was a product of colonial intervention in the Indian Ocean. From its early importance as a port city, it became by the late 19th century a major center of industrial production, and soon after, the financial capital of India. In the decades that followed, it also emerged as the heart of India's film industry. Indeed, Bombay grew to become the most important metropolis of the subcontinent in both colonial and post-colonial times. But how did this remarkable transformation occur? How did a small set of islands, originally home to fishing communities, evolve into a sprawling global metropolis, a center of commerce, industry, finance, and culture? What were the forces, policies, and enterprises that drove this change? In this episode, we will trace the journey of Bombay's urban evolution, exploring how colonial trade networks, the opium economy, British infrastructure investments, and migration all played a role in shaping the city we know today as Mumbai. As historian and Delhi University professor, Amar Farooqi argues in his book, Opium City, The Making of Early Victorian Bombay, it was this powerful combination of commerce and empire that transformed Bombay into a sprawling global metropolis. Today, we revisit this forgotten chapter of Mumbai's evolution. Before it became crowded, Bombay was simply a group of swampy islands on India's western coast. These islands were mostly inhabited by fishing communities and scattered villages. For centuries, they were quiet, almost forgotten corners of the Arabian Sea. That began to change when European colonial powers turned their attention to the Indian Ocean. In the 16th century, the Portuguese arrived and took control of the islands. They built a few forts and churches, but Bombay remained a modest settlement. A major turning point came in the 17th century when the British acquired Bombay. In 1661, the islands were given as part of a royal dowry when the Portuguese Princess Catherine of Braganza married King Charles II of England. The crown then passed it on to the British East India Company in 1668 for a rent of £10 a year. But for over a century, it struggled, because Bombay had no productive hinterland, no major trade item, and was surrounded by the formidable Western Ghats. Lord Cornwallis once suggested that Bombay be downgraded to just a small factory. The port's only strength was its natural harbour. But by the 1820s, everything was about to change.
In Bombay harbour, one spring morning, a giant luxury liner carrying hundreds of tourists on a round-the-world...
Over the next century, Bombay's strategic location made it an increasingly important base for trade. The harbour was ideal for ships travelling between Europe, Africa, and Asia. Gradually, docks, warehouses, and customs houses sprang up along the waterfront. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, Bombay was attracting merchants, labourers, and migrants from across Western India. The British began laying down infrastructure, roads, administrative buildings, and new shipping facilities. But it was the thriving opium trade with China that truly propelled Bombay's growth faster. By the early 19th century, the fortunes of Bombay began to change, thanks to a single commodity, opium. The British East India Company had established a monopoly over the production and sale of Bengal opium, which was grown under strict supervision and then auctioned in Calcutta. From there, it was shipped to China, where the appetite for opium was enormous. This trade became one of the most profitable enterprises of the colonial economy, funding much of the company's activities in India. But Bengal opium was only one part of the story. In Western India, another powerful trade was taking shape, one that the British struggled to control. This was Malwa opium, cultivated mainly in the princely states of central and western India, beyond the reach of company regulation. Indian merchants quickly recognized an opportunity. Unlike Bengal opium, Malwa opium was more accessible to them. They purchased it directly from producers and transported it overland across Rajputana through territories that were not fully under British rule. By the 1820s, a vibrant alternative export route had developed. From the Malwa region, caravans carried bales of opium westwards. Some shipments traveled down to the port of Bombay, while others moved further north to Karachi, which was then part of Sindh. From these ports, ships sailed across the Arabian Sea, around the Malay Peninsula, and up to the southern Chinese coast. In China, all imported opium was technically illegal, but demand was so high that both legal company opium and unofficial Malwa opium flooded the market. The British authorities repeatedly tried to curb this parallel trade because it undermined their opium monopoly. They imposed customs duties, enforced regulations, and negotiated treaties with local rulers to restrict Malwa production. Yet, in practice, enforcement was almost impossible. The scale of smuggling was enormous, and the profits were irresistible. As a result, Bombay became the main gateway for Malwa opium exports, complemented by Karachi further north. Indian merchants, including prominent Parsi, Gujarati, and Marwari trading families, financed shipments, built warehouses, and organized complex transport networks. This surge in commerce transformed Bombay's economy. The wealth from opium trade flowed into banking, shipping, and urban development. Warehouses rose along the docks, merchant offices expanded, and the city began to grow as a major port. No longer just a sleepy outpost, but the beating heart of a global narcotics business. As the 19th century progressed, the wealth flowing through the opium trade did much more than enrich a handful of merchants. The profits earned by Indian and British trading firms were invested back into the city, into warehouses, stockyards, banks, insurance companies, and shipping lines. This created an expanding commercial infrastructure that soon outgrew the opium trade and diversified into cotton exports, textiles, and finance. A major milestone came in 1843, when the British annexed Sindh after defeating its rulers. The conquest of Sindh brought the port of Karachi firmly under British control, strengthening the western trade routes that had long supplied Bombay with Malwa opium. There has been some speculation that this was done partly because the British wanted complete control of the opium trade in India. With Karachi now firmly under British rule, Bombay's trading networks along the western coast grew even stronger, cementing its role as the region's main commercial hub. By the mid-1800s, the American Civil War disrupted cotton supplies to Britain, and Bombay's merchants seized the moment. The city became a critical supplier of raw cotton to British mills, earning huge fortunes almost overnight. The same entrepreneurial families who had once shipped opium now built textile mills, establishing Bombay as India's first major industrial center. At the same time, the British invested heavily in urban development. Land reclamation connected the original islands into one continuous piece of land. New roads, railway lines, and docks were constructed to serve the booming trade. The city's skyline began to change as Victorian-era buildings, commercial offices, and grand civic institutions rose along the harbour. Migration from across the subcontinent further transformed Bombay. Communities of Gujarati traders, Parsi industrialists, Konkani Christians, Muslim merchants, and Marathi-speaking workers all poured into the city. By the late 19th century, Bombay had emerged as the most important metropolis of British India. It was the hub of colonial economy, a center for shipping, banking, industry, and the gateway through which India was connected to the wider world. Yet, behind the modern skyline and bustling markets was the legacy of the opium trade, a powerful force that had fueled Bombay's rise from a neglected outpost into India's financial and industrial capital. The story is incomplete without the mention of Sir Jamsetjee Jejeebhoy, a Parsi trader who went from modest beginnings to one of the wealthiest men in colonial India. Jejeebhoy started out working for established firms before building his own trading empire. He invested heavily in buying Malwa opium. Jejeebhoy was not alone. Other Parsi and Gujarati merchants, including the Wadiyas, the Reddy Monis, and Premchand Roychand, were also involved in financing, transporting, and insuring opium cargoes. They created sophisticated business networks that connected Bombay to inland production zones and overseas Chinese markets. These traders created a new kind of commerce that blurred the lines between so-called legal and illegal opium exports. While the British East India Company held a monopoly over Bengal opium, the Malwa variety remained in a grey area that Indian merchants skillfully exploited. Jejeebhoy used his wealth to invest in the city itself. He funded hospitals, schools, wells, and charitable institutions. His contributions to public works earned him a knighthood. He became the first Indian to be knighted by the British Crown. But their legacy was also marked by contradictions. The same influential leaders who funded hospitals and educational institutions often resisted efforts to tax their wealth for public services like clean water. In the 1850s, when the city proposed levying taxes to build a reliable water supply, many prominent merchants opposed the idea, reluctant to pay for infrastructure that benefited everyone. At the same time, these elites supported laws that targeted the poorest migrants arriving in Bombay. They passed ordinances to identify and deport so-called idle outsiders, workers and families fleeing famine or poverty, whom they blamed for overcrowding and disease. It's a sentiment that still echoes today. The 1990s brought a wave of political reimaginings that reshaped how the city understood itself. Regional parties rose to prominence and redefined urban identity along linguistic and cultural lines. In 1995, Bombay officially became Mumbai, a name change that signaled a new narrative. This was Marathi Manus ki Mumbai, a city of the sons of the soil, now supposedly threatened by outsiders. But what happens to history when it doesn't fit the story? Amar Farooqi's careful research using ledgers, shipping records, and old court documents challenges this idea. The truth is, Mumbai was built by many different communities. Parsis, Gujaratis, Biharis, and migrants from all over India came here to work, trade, and create wealth. Bihar's poppy fields and Malwa's smugglers laid the economic foundation of this city. The opium trade carried on the backs of traders and laborers funded Bombay's docks, warehouses, and early industries. The irony is that much later, those same Bihari migrants and others were labeled outsiders in the city their own hands helped build. History doesn't always fit into simple stories. To truly understand Mumbai, we have to remember all the people who shaped it, no matter where they came from. So what does this history teach us? It reminds us that the evolution of Mumbai was never a closed local story. It was a story of migration, trade, risk, capital, and contradiction. Cities are built on dreams, yes, but also on uncomfortable truths. And this is the truth of Mumbai.